We did not, repeat, did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages.
It seems virtually certain that what the Soviets have experienced is a nuclear meltdown.
Space shuttle launch ever gets underway, Challenger seems to shake herself free of the ice and goes. All 5 rocket engines burning well.
Because you're dangerous. That's right. Ice, man. I am dangerous.
The year is 1986. A former nuclear technician from a Middle Eastern nation has taken secret documents from his clandestine worksite, and he goes to London, England, to meet with a reporter from the Times of London. They talk at length, and the nuclear technician lays out an incredible tale of how this Middle Eastern country has been secretly building up a nuclear arsenal, and that it was actually in possession of a substantial number of nuclear weapons. At the time, that country was denying to the world that it had a nuclear program. But the whistleblower had photos and evidence and his own testimony that would prove that this Middle Eastern nation had been systematically lying about its nuclear capabilities and its large quantity of weapons.
Because I worked in that place and I knew a lot about what they are doing there, I concluded that they producing too much atomic bomb beyond any imagination of all the world's spy organization, including the CIA. My conclusion from my production is they are producing about 10 atomic bomb every year. And they have around 200 atomic bomb. It's too much, and I decided the world must know.
Shortly before the story was published, journalists from the Times of London confronted this Middle Eastern government in question with the information that it received from one of its own secret nuclear technicians.
Here was someone who'd said he'd worked right inside the plutonium separation plant helping to fabricate atomic weapons, who had taken photographs of the machinery, and who had lots of information about how much material was being processed and so on, and therefore he was potentially going to be able to provide incontrovertible evidence.
This Middle Eastern government denied the allegations made by its former technician to the Times, and they said it was all lies, that this was a disgruntled and deranged individual who, by the way, was a low-level employee who had no real expertise. But secretly, that Middle Eastern government was in a panic. They had already heard from an informant about this technician's meetings with journalists. The notorious spy agency from that nation had its psychologists study the man in question and develop a profile that would allow them to target this whistleblower. And they hatched a plot to kidnap him. But they needed to get this former technician out of London, out of the UK. This government did not want to anger then British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, so they turned to an old trick, a honeypot trap. An operative from this Middle Eastern country's spy agency flew to London and posed as an American tourist named Cindy. She was armed with psychological information about the former nuclear technician and had been prepped on how to get close to him. He was lonely and seeking companionship, female companionship. It didn't take long for Cindy to convince this former technician that she was drawn to him, that she needed to be with him. And when she suggested that they take a nice little vacation to Italy in the fall of 1986, he agreed. They flew to Rome, got in a taxi, and went to a rented apartment. There, the former technician was snatched by spies from the government's intelligence service. He was drugged and thrown in a van. He was then taken to a port, put into a speedboat, and ultimately whisked away to a military vessel that was posing as a merchant ship just off the coast of Italy. A month later, the Times of London published its story.
He'd met an American woman in Leicester Square who seemed to like him. He was vulnerable and afraid. When she suggested he'd be safer with her in Rome, he fell for it. It was a classic honey trap. He was overpowered, assaulted, and drugged. For weeks, no one knew where he was.
That former technician, who was kidnapped in Italy, was ultimately prosecuted in his home country. It was a secret trial, and he was convicted of treason and aggravated espionage, among other charges.
He is the most sensitive prisoner that this country's got, and whenever he comes here, they block off the windows of his van if they can, or in the early days, they used to put a crash helmet over him so people couldn't see him. And at one point, they even had an electronic device that emitted a screeching signal so people couldn't hear him speak.
That technician was sentenced to 18 years in prison, and he would end up serving 11 years in solitary confinement. But because of this man and his sacrifice, the world now knew that this Middle Eastern country had been lying for years about its nuclear program. That whistleblower was named Mordechai Vanunu, and the country whose nuclear program he exposed was Israel. This is former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres talking about Mordechai Vanunu's actions in an interview with the BBC.
He was a traitor to his country.
So what was your reaction?
Very negative.
What did you do?
What I thought should be done.
Which was what?
To put him to trial.
Kidnap him?
My lady, I can't go into all the processes. I'm unwilling. I don't see any reason to do so. The fact is that he was brought to trial.
This was not Iraq. This was not Iran. This was Israel. Keep that in mind. Keep this story in mind as you listen to Benjamin Netanyahu and all of the right-wing pundits on cable news and in newspapers taking his claims about Iran at face value. There is one massive nuclear power in the Middle East with the ability to wipe countries off the map. And that nation is Israel. And the reason we know about that is because of Mordechai Vanunu.
I feel it's very bad what they did, and I think they did the same to many things they did to me, but in Israel they did it very secret.
On Monday night, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, held a live, globally televised event that bizarrely looked like an early 2000s Steve Jobs presentation. Netanyahu stood in front of a giant screen, which was broadcasting a PowerPoint presentation summarizing scores of what Netanyahu said were internal documents seized from Iran by Israeli intelligence. These documents, Netanyahu told the world, proved beyond a doubt that Iran has nuclear weapon ambitions.
Iran lied. Big time. After signing the nuclear deal in 2015, Iran intensified its efforts to hide its secret nuclear files. In 2017, Iran moved its nuclear weapons files to a highly secret location in Tehran. This is the Shorabad district in southern Tehran. This is where they kept the atomic archives.
Now, a lot of people speculate that Netanyahu's presentation was intended for an audience of one, Donald Trump. And the White House did respond to Netanyahu's stunt by releasing a statement to journalists. And I'm quoting here, "These facts are consistent with what the United States has long known. Iran has a robust, clandestine nuclear weapons program that it has tried and failed to hide from the world and from its own people." Wow. Iran has, this is what the White House statement said, Iran has a robust, clandestine nuclear program. Just wow. After that statement was reported, and former U.S. officials, including former CIA officials, expressed a mixture of concern and outrage at what they said was absolutely false. And people began to question this definitive statement from the White House. Only then did the administration revise its statement to assert that Iran had such a program in the past. It is ironic, though, that the White House would also focus on Iran hiding a nuclear program from the world and its own people when Israel did just that and more. And Israel actually had nukes when they said they didn't. And they actually locked up a whistleblower who had been placed in essentially a box of solitary confinement for 11 years for the crime of warning the world of this grave danger posed by the fact that a Middle Eastern nation, Israel, had nuclear weapons. But that's how it is and how it's always been on this question when we're talking about Israel. And by the way, Netanyahu is basically the absolute last person that Americans should listen to about nuclear weapons in the Middle East. Consider just a few of Netanyahu's greatest hits. And by greatest hits, I mean flat out lies or wildly inaccurate and incorrect predictions.
There is no question whatsoever that Saddam is seeking and is working and is advancing towards the development of nuclear weapons. No question whatsoever. If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. Here's a diagram. This is a bomb. This is a fuse. In the case of Iran's nuclear plans to build a bomb, even after the deal, Iran continued to preserve and expand its nuclear weapons know-how for future use.
Those just some of Benjamin Netanyahu's hits.